Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today we're going to do a fast and loose watercolor landscape painting utilizing one tube of paint. We're going to play around with Daniel Smith McCracken Black. This was recommended by another YouTuber, so I ordered it to try it out. It is made with 7 different pigments. It was designed by artist Mr. McCracken. He was inspired by the Dutch painters of the 16th and 17th century. He wanted a black that was neutral. He could add a little bit of color to it to go warm, add a little bit of color to go cool with it, to kind of push it back and forth. And it looks like he developed it in order to get the effect of metal surfaces, polished silver and still lifes, to get that realistic look. So that being said, I'm going to probably utilize it for the exact purpose it wasn't designed for, playing around with the landscape painting aspect. But down the line, it sounds like it'd be great to explore still lifes and have fun with that. So we have a 1/4 sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. It is 100% cotton, 140-pound cold press. I've been coating it with water, so that will go wet and wet. And we'll go through the motions and we'll just have fun with it. I'm going to use the hake brush to start us out. I'm going to take the approach of the tonalist painters Stuart Davies and Dennis Sheehan, where I'm going to kind of go in back and forth with this, where I'll put my pigment in and I'll use the paper towel to wipe back. My goal for this experiment is just to see the tonal variety that I can get with this tube of paint. And right off the bat, for me, okay, so it's supposed to be a neutral black. I am getting that vibe. Pigment-wise, there's I think like 2 different purples or violets in it. It comes in a 15 milliliter tube. And I'm curious how dark it'll wind up getting, and if we'll have a tonal shift whenever we do our dry offs. So we're making up an imaginary scene, just building up the composition. You're more than welcome to paint along. That being said, I'll get it out the way where you are more than welcome to sign your own name to anything you do whenever you follow one of my tutorials, and you have my express permission to sell anything you do whenever you follow one of my tutorials. All right. I think it's okay. Light fastness is excellent. Transparency, it's transparent. Staining 2. It's a low staining. And slightly granulating. That's some statistics, attributes. Using the paper towel to lift. Pull back to the white of the paper here. Pull some highlights in the water area here. And while I was scrolling through the Daniel Smith page, looking for the descriptor of this pigment, I saw some paintings by this Mr. McCracken. They were absolutely fantastic still lifes. They're so realistic. And to think that he did them with watercolor is even more amazing. So I'm not really up on my contemporary artists, just modern, still living artists. But oh my god, this guy is really good. Like, definitely fine art. And on this channel, we paint fast and loose, and we usually get things done in one session. I can only imagine how long it takes to paint the way he does. Like I said, he's an architect by trade. All right, I put out a little bit more paint. I am being a little timid with the quantity that I'm putting out. Daniel Smith pigments and tubes are more expensive than what I'm used to. I usually utilize the Van Gogh brand, the Cotman brand, and if I get them for the right price, Da Vinci brand. And the good thing about student line pigments is you don't have the reservation in regards to putting a lot of pigment out. Whenever I'm using more expensive pigments, it's very easy to start being frugal and conservative with it, which probably hurts in the long run. Okay. So I'm going to wind up putting some more pigment in a moment, but we can see the granulation taking place. And it definitely does have that metallic effect that you would think of with silverware. It seems to lift relatively easily. You definitely go back and forth, but we haven't really built up any tonal depth to it. All right, let's put out some more paint. All right. A good way to describe it would be if you had an Oreo milkshake or an Oreo ice cream, those small pieces of the Oreo cookie. That's what it kind of feels like, the granulation there. I mentioned earlier that it has 2 purples or 2 violets within it, and for me it seems slightly purplish, but that is just me. I'm curious what you all think, or if you all have experimented with this, what do you think? It almost feels like we had played around with the neutral tint, and the neutral tint had some purple push in it as well. So I think the concept behind this tube is probably a neutral tint, like a neutral black. I wonder how it would be pulling it from a pan if you had filled up some pans with it. It's Hammy and Percy Poo running around playing. Let's grab the number 1 rigger and we'll start throwing our vertical trees in the background. So we're still wet and wet. The main goal here is just to develop the scene, just to put background trees in. They're going to soften and diffuse. Not quite sure how the tonality will be when it dries, but that's all part of the experiment. We're just putting it through the fast and loose motions. I really do need to do some watercolor still lives. Now this is pretty much straight from the pile of paint right there. We're going to do the edge of the foreground landscape, come up and over. We'll try to get some leafy texture. Here. You can scrape it too and see how that is. Being that it's low staining, we shouldn't really have too many issues. So hopefully you see the scene developing. It's not developing as fast as I usually paint. Okay, we have our background mass here. We have this mass here coming across. We can pull out a little bit more highlight in the water. Seems to come up pretty easily, which is good. And what we'll do is we'll do a pause, we'll do a dry off, and we'll see how things soften. All right, a few thoughts as it dried off. Looking at it from a distance and standing up and blow drying, I didn't feel like it was like a violet purple push. I definitely felt like it was black. I think it lightened up maybe a little bit, but it didn't seem too much. The heavy deposits in these spots, I'm not the biggest fan of that, and I sometimes have that happen with Payne's Gray, where sometimes the black might settle out. And I'm not sure if there is any black in it or what would cause that. Then in addition to that, it was very reminiscent of, I'm in my 30s, and when I was a kid, they had a book series that was like, what was it? It was scary stories. And they were scary. They're definitely not for kids, at least from what I remember. And there's a few in the book series. And the colors are, or the black, the tonality is very reminiscent of the cover of that book. If you know what scary book series I'm talking about, mention it down below. They're just like kind of short stories. It wasn't like R.L. Stine or anything like that. It was, well, I'll have to look it up. Okay, so now we're playing around with a little bit more heavier mixes. We're going over our dry, so we're no longer wet and wet. We have to be careful that we just don't put the same tone throughout. So I'm going to use the paper towel to lift, and we're going to go back and forth. And using the hake, we want to make sure we vary the marks that we're making. in regards to landscape, you can definitely get a very awesome foggy effect. Like I said, it brings back that feel of the scary book stories. So I think cemetery stuff, Gothic works. Let's grab a little bit more pigment and feed that in. So as we use the hake, we start adding water to that spot, and then from there it'll diffuse and create wet and wet again. This hake is a Ranson hake brush. It's been used for quite some time. Your hake brush may differ. It just takes a while to wear in a hake brush. But just go to town and have fun, and don't, I think I use the word timid a lot this video. Don't be timid with it in that regard. That's a little too high perspective-wise. Definitely has the metallic look to it. I think it'd be a lot of fun to use it as intended, to add a little bit of color, to push it in one direction, warm it up, add a little bit of color, and cool it down. Maybe a light red oxide, ultramarine palette, and then this guy. Or no, I just use burnt sienna, ultramarine, and this fella, and just push back and forth. There's an artist that I mentioned in my last video, a YouTube painter, very prolific and shares a lot of knowledge. Rick S. If you just search Rick and watercolor, he'll come up. He would use the ultramarine and the raw sienna and push back and forth within the shadows, you know, creating his dark with those two and push back and forth. You could probably use this pigment with that combination and push it in that fashion. Creating a little bit of foreground trees that'll come up out of here. So now we're gonna have to really darken things up. Just got paint everywhere. All right, let me put this cap on. Spread that out. So this is the number 1. Probably should switch to the number 4 in a moment. Let's see what variety of density of trees we can get going. We'll switch to the number 4 if I can find it. There it is. So while I do this, I'll ramble a little bit. So first impressions, I know that one of my issues would be essentially kind of the cost and the usage of it. because I try to use the student grade, you know, kind of lower cost paints and tubes. I think this is probably around a $12 tube of paint, which in the grand scheme of things really isn't that bad. And so far it has that nice neutral black gray feel to it. And I'm sure knowing what you're doing can really help this paint go a long way. Let's see, so this is the number 4. Just building that up. We'll grab some of the strong pigment on the hake, build up this dark foliage. And to continue with the rambling, black and white are usually frowned upon within watercolor and in painting in general, but like it had said in the description, it was influenced by the Dutch painters of the 1600s and 1700s, and you know, they had their black pigment back then. If pigment was good enough for our painting heroes from that time period, then you know, black should be good enough for us. People will often say that they feel like it deadens the color whenever it's mixed with other things, and they often want their darks mixed from color as opposed to just pulling out a black. That's usually, you know, the argument that's made there. Some of like the logistical arguments, I don't know if they're really made in this regard, but you'll put a black in or a Payne's gray, which is black and blue mixed into it, and well, originally Payne's gray was 3 colors mixed together. There was no black in it. But anyway, so the modern pigments of Payne's gray will often lighten as they dry. So that's kind of an issue with the watercolors, that you have that tonal shift. If you can paint with this and you don't have that tonal shift where it softens and lightens up when it dries, that'll be absolutely fantastic. So if we just use this guy and it just looks soft, then you'd want to be soft for a reason. You'd want it for like that fog effect, if that's the case. I'm not saying that's the case, but pass over our background trees here, going for that variation and that sense of depth. Maybe one day I can get good enough to have a Broussard color. I joke about that with Joe Menza and Matthew Clemens. And honestly, if I was to pursue any color, it'd be Hammy, right? Hey, Hammy. It would be brown, as you can probably tell from a lot of my paintings that I like that old brown mix. And plus Broussard brown would sound really awesome. I know Jane Blundell, I've mentioned her on this channel before. She's a watercolorist, and her site was very informative when I was getting into watercolors and looking at different brands and pigments. She would do a lot of different tests, and she'd have Jane's Gray, where I think it was a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine, and she would pre-make that and put that on her palette. And if you look, you'd probably find a lot more paints named after different people. Right, Hammy? Hammy, you're gonna get paint all over you. We played around with a lot of those in the past few months. We played around with Van Dyke Brown, which I picked up the Daniel Smith Van Dyke Brown in a 5 milliliter tube. So we'll play around with that in a video one day. We've looked at Davies Gray, which is pretty often overlooked, but it has... Hammy, you can't stop. You gotta stop, dude. I'm sorry, Hammy's trying to climb on me. The Davies Gray, which has that greenish aspect, it was very light. Then I talked about Payne's Gray before, and then the Van Dyke Brown, which was the rich chocolate browns. Here we got McCracken Black. That's a really cool last name. Let's build up some of our darks here. We'll probably do a dry off and take a look and see how the whole scene is looking and what we should develop. Okay, let me pause and do a dry off. Okay, so we're relatively dry. It is definitely that silver neutral black. I feel like it's a little sparse, and I think that's my own doing. As I've mentioned before, I've been reluctant to use a lot of the pigment due to, the price. But from here, let's use a lot, and we'll see how dark we can get. I have to stand up while I'm painting now because Hammy is on the art stool. Let's see. So now the goal here is just to see how dark I can get it in the fast and loose manner. We'll bring its shadow down. Looks pretty dark on camera. Let's put out some more. And just go as dark as we can with this layer of trees. I'm breaking my own rule and kind of passing over background trees. I'm not meaning to, but it's accidental. I'm just trying to create a sense of depth here. Shadows. I dropped my brush. Grab this here. So a few things for the comments and for people watching. Let me know below, what do you like to use for your darks? Is there a mixture that you prefer? Is there anything you'd like to see me experiment with? I have the Patreon, so I try to take the funds and the support from there and, first of all, fund the art supplies for the channel, but also I try to explore other either mediums, pigments, brushes, brands with that funding. So if there's anything you'd like to see, let me know and I'll try to make it happen. In a few days, I'll put up a post to see what people would like for next month. I touched on a lot of things from the last post that I did like that, and I had a lot of fun in that doing that. I think somebody had requested a beach scene, but I didn't get around to that, so that'll have to be on the list for next month. It's fun having like plans for the channel, but kind of keeping the plans a little loose. So we're looking to just see how dark we can get it. I also have a lot more brushes I need to go over. We had a lot of fun experimenting with some of the Hobby Lobby brand brushes. Building up our darks in the foreground. Foliage. I think we need to have something in here. We can even put some birds flying up. Just make a few marks for little ducks or whatever on the water. twiggy branches coming up in that foreground. All right, we'll pull up the last bit of this pigment. We'll do a dry off and we'll do a final look. Okay. All right, quick dry off and we'll talk about it. All right, so McCracken black. And this is looking at it from a fast and loose watercolor landscape viewpoint. First of all, it definitely is a neutral black. It looks, like I had said earlier, like cookies and cream, like Oreos in ice cream or milk. It took a while to build up the tonal densities, which I think gives us a lot more tonal value and probably really suits the purpose of painting metal in a still life and having those subtle gradations. That being said, it did take me a while to build it up for the landscape purposes. I do like the darks that we got here. I do have a little bit of, I can't think of the term, bronzing, where you have a thick application of pigment and that causes a shiny reflective surface. That's not an issue with the paint, that's an issue with my application. It did lift well. We scraped a little bit. I didn't really focus too much on scraping with this. And there was another point where I put in the base of this tree and I hit it with the hake brush and it pushed the pigment out. So it does lift very easily. So you can really go back and forth with it and just be aware of that. You know, other points of interest. And right there you could see just that good tonal gradation. I like it. I'm really glad that I got a tube of it. I want to play around with it on top of paintings in the last stage. Curious to just use it as black accent marks. I know that's not the purpose of the paint, but I think that that'd be nice for the fast and loose approach. Initial washes on it would be very nice. Either that or neutral tint would be great for a foggy effect. Payne's gray, you know, those along those lines. And looking at the painter that developed this paint with Daniel Smith, I mean, it's ultra inspiring. He's just absolutely fantastic. And it makes me want to play around with still lives. So there's a lot to it. I had a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed. Like I said, let me know in the comments what you like to use for your darks. What would you like to see? And what would you like me to address? On that note, you all take care and have a great day. Bye.